What are your thoughts on this specific investigation, and how does it stand out from other cases you have handled in the past? Well, this situation is incredibly unique for a multitude of reasons, starting primarily with the victimology and her personal background. It also stands out because of the unfolding evidence, especially since we literally have surveillance footage of someone approaching and preparing to execute a kidnapping. Furthermore, it remains highly unusual because investigators are still entirely in the dark regarding the actual motive behind this crime. Those three distinct factors truly put this in a league of its own, drawing an absolutely massive amount of media coverage. I genuinely cannot remember a recent investigation sparking this level of interest, which is fantastic because it keeps the heat squarely on the culprit. While Sheriff Chris Nanos was actively giving the Guthrie family a public pass, something else was happening behind the scenes. This included clearing the very last person known to have seen Nancy alive before her sudden disappearance. A veteran investigator who spent over 10 years tracking America's most lethal predators quietly sat down to share her expert read on the situation. Her assessment completely contradicted the sheriff's narrative, leaving everyone wondering who she is and what exactly caught her eye. More importantly, will her insights actually carry weight, or will authorities just sweep them under the rug like everything else in this case? The expert in question is Mary Ellen O'Toole, and you need to prioritize her perspective over any other talking head because of her actual track record. She is not just citing academic theories or offering random opinions from the comfort of a television studio desk. Instead, she brings real-world experience, having dedicated over 10 years of her life to the Behavioral Analysis Unit at the FBI. It is the exact same division Hollywood glorifies in countless crime shows, though the real job is far less glamorous and highly technical. She actively investigated the Unabomber, the Zodiac Killer, the Green River Killer, and the Natalee Holloway disappearance. After wrapping up her career with the Bureau, she refused to take the easy route into television broadcasting. She transitioned to George Mason University, where she currently directs the Forensic Science program and shapes the next wave of criminal investigators. She never relies on guesswork, applying a meticulously developed methodology to behavioral patterns that are clearly visible on tape for anyone willing to pay attention. We are facing a massive issue regarding how the details of this investigation have been relayed to the general public. Sheriff Nanos delivered his briefings and hosted his press conferences for the cameras. He dictated exactly who had been ruled out, and somewhere along the line, the community started treating those statements as absolute gospel. People assumed that if Nanos cleared someone, the issue was permanently settled and everyone could just look the other way. However, there is a monumental gap between a local cop dismissing a suspect and a world-class behavioral profiler evaluating the facts. O'Toole scrutinized the exact same evidence, breaking down step by step what the psychological footprints of this specific crime actually reveal. Those two perspectives are worlds apart, and they were never meant to be viewed as equals. As of today, more than 30 days after Nancy Guthrie walked into her residence and vanished, she remains missing. Therefore, O'Toole's analysis is not just some wild hypothesis. It stems from decades of recognizing behavioral signatures across hundreds of violent abductions. She explained to Steve Inskeep from NPR that in comparable abduction scenarios, the patterns are strikingly consistent. Specifically, when a target is snatched right out of their own residence, the perpetrator usually has a history of trespassing into other homes. They do not always commit heinous acts on the level of what we are witnessing right now. Sometimes they just wander through, taking it all in, getting a thrill from experiencing the interior of a house where they absolutely do not belong. The demeanor displayed on that porch, the steady calm, the calculated prep, the deliberate movements does not belong to a first-time offender. That is her professional takeaway, derived from a lifetime dedicated to analyzing this exact type of criminal behavior. Before we dive any deeper into her observations and their implications, we must clarify one crucial point, and we are only going to say it once. We are absolutely not accusing Tommaso Cioni or anybody remotely connected to him of committing a crime. Authorities have not made a single arrest, nor have they officially designated anyone as a prime suspect. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated on the record that Cioni is not a suspect, a fact his legal counsel has also publicly confirmed. Throughout this whole nightmare, Annie Guthrie and her husband have stood firmly side by side, showing up with relatives and taking all the expected steps of a mourning household. Our goal right now is not to put anyone on trial, but rather to double check absolutely every possibility for everyone. That means re-examining the leads that police say they already looked into, since Nancy Guthrie remains entirely unaccounted for. If a loved one has not returned for over 30 days and authorities have failed to lock anyone up, it raises alarm. When the federal agents suddenly stop talking, you absolutely cannot stop investigating the inner circle of the victim. Actually, it becomes the perfect time to demand tougher answers, and we are doing this for reasons far beyond internet gossip or social media drama. We push forward because Mary Ellen O'Toole, the very profiler who played a massive role in catching the Unabomber, got involved. She created a psychological blueprint of the suspect, and comparing it against the physical evidence we actually have just keeps pointing us toward one specific direction. Let us break it all down and discuss Tommaso Cioni, an Italian native who has called Arizona home since 2006. Working as an academic instructor, he spent more than 10 years teaching junior high and advanced placement biology classes. Everyone described him as a deeply dedicated educator who enjoys writing literary pieces and researching reptiles. Furthermore, he sings and plays bass for a Tucson music group named Early Black, and he tied the knot with Nancy's eldest child back in 2006. The couple shares a single male child. His wife has openly praised him as her ultimate mentor, famously claiming that his very way of living is poetic. On paper, he appears to be an incredibly reserved guy enjoying a peaceful existence out in the southwestern sand. He usually stayed way out of the spotlight, but his sister-in-law's fame and the tragic events of February 1st completely destroyed that privacy. According to the local sheriff, this man was definitely among the final individuals, if not the absolute last, to look Nancy Guthrie in the eye before she vanished. Following a family meal on the night of January 31st, he gave her a ride back, dropping her off somewhere between 9:30 and 9:48 in the evening before the timeline cuts out. It stays completely dark until 1:47 the next morning, when a mysterious visitor unplugged her security camera, plunging the residence into 41 minutes of unseen mystery. At exactly 2:28 before dawn, her medical heart monitor dropped its wireless link, proving someone had dragged her completely out of signal range. Those crimson stains left on the entryway steps validated the absolute worst nightmares of the community. Clearly, she never left that property of her own free will, leading federal agents to raid the couple's shared residence on the 4th of February. Investigators came right back on February 7th and stayed for hours, visibly wearing protective surgical gloves. They were snapping pictures of the rooms and hauling in gear specifically designed to pull digital footprints from personal electronics. Law enforcement showed up repeatedly, even going so far as to seize and tow away a car linked to the property. That automobile remained locked in the police lot on February 27th, long after officials supposedly cleared the relatives, leaving a massive, unexplained hole in the narrative. Things get incredibly messy right here, so we need to strictly separate actual truth from internet chatter, since the web is overflowing with both. Looking strictly at the facts, Cioni undeniably stands as the final verified individual in Nancy's company prior to her vanishing act. Detectives tore through his house several times using strict crime scene procedures, and they definitely confiscated a car. Unlike some other figures in this drama, authorities never officially cleared his name in front of the press, which remains an undeniable matter of public record. To be totally transparent, everything surrounding his potential reasons for doing this falls firmly into the category of unverified guesswork rather than hard journalism. Whenever a loved one vanishes and a family member is involved, detectives invariably ask the exact same thing. They want to know exactly how this individual could possibly benefit from such a tragedy. Applying that specific lens to Cioni uncovers a few loose threads that might seem harmless alone, but together they paint a picture you simply cannot ignore. An unconfirmed paper popped up on social media via a profile named Matt Black Incorporated, suggesting he handed his wife full legal control over his money and assets. That specific paperwork carried a stamp from May 16th, 2025, which was several months before Nancy dropped off the map. Attorneys frequently point out that drafting these types of control agreements happens all the time. People generally use them for real estate deals, meaning the paperwork itself does not automatically scream foul play. However, the sheer timing of it all definitely made people suspicious, prompting a freelance detective named St. James Hartline to bring it up online. Why on earth would a guy hand over total legal authority to his partner unless his mind was slipping, he planned to run away, or he feared a judge would freeze his bank accounts? Each of those distinct possibilities carries wildly different implications for the case. While only a single option counts as normal business, the whispers about massive betting losses add a whole new layer of intrigue. Internet gossip suggested he was in the hole for tens of millions of dollars at a casino down in Mexico, though reporters from the Hindustan Times turned up absolutely zero proof to back that up. Everyone basically dismissed the story as completely unproven, and we certainly will not act like it is hard fact here. Even though that rumor falls apart under scrutiny, the overall trend it highlights is absolutely worth keeping an eye on. We keep seeing all these hints pointing straight toward money trouble, suggesting a guy silently drowning under the weight of severe anxiety without a single soul noticing. O'Toole actually pointed out, which we will definitely explore later, how the perpetrator's inner circle probably noticed a distinct shift in their behavior during the weeks leading up to the incident. They might not have grasped the exact reasons or details, but they absolutely sensed an undeniable change in the atmosphere. Now, nobody is definitively pinning that description on Kieran. However, when a top-tier expert lays out those specific behavioral clues, and you consider the lingering doubts surrounding Nancy's inner circle, you simply cannot ignore the obvious questions. That brings us directly to the musical group known as Early Black, which officially started rocking out back in April of 2007 with Tomajan on bass and singing lead, while Dominic Aaron Lee Evans kept the beat on the drums. Walter Goncalves Jr. shredded on the guitar, proving these guys were absolutely not just some random strangers jamming for a single night at a local coffee shop. We are talking about the original crew of a musical act that practically lived together through constant, intense collaboration over multiple years. All those countless practice sessions and live shows inevitably forged that unique, unbreakable bond you only really develop when creating art side by side for that long. Evans and Cioni were way beyond basic buddies. They were deeply embedded in the daily routines, home environments, and personal family dynamics of one another. Dominic Evans actually confessed to the New York Times about crossing paths with Nancy Guthrie directly at her own residence during a springtime holiday gathering way back in 2011. He completely crossed over into their private family sphere, meaning he was not merely hanging around Cioni, but actively interacting within Nancy's personal world. Fast forward roughly 7 days into the official search, and detectives pulled Evans in for a highly structured 40-minute interrogation covering quite a bit of ground. Based entirely on his personal statement given to the New York Times, the cops grilled him regarding his deep ties to Cioni alongside all their musical endeavors. They also demanded to know exactly where he was during the overnight hours stretching from January 31st straight into the 1st of February, which clearly shows incredibly targeted police work. Detectives absolutely do not waste 40 solid minutes grilling a guy regarding his musical hobbies during a frantic search operation unless that group holds a critical piece of the puzzle. Real police work simply does not operate that way, which naturally begs the question of what other secrets might be hiding in Evans's past. Internet sleuths, particularly the folks running the handle JLR Investigates, dug up some pretty damning rap sheets seemingly tied to a guy sharing both his exact identity and hometown. The paperwork hinted at a slew of serious offenses ranging from breaking and entering to grand larceny and corporate theft, though I must emphasize that our team hasn't personally authenticated these documents yet. Furthermore, there is zero absolute proof confirming those specific rap sheets actually belong to the exact same Dominic Evans tied up in our current mystery. However, we do know for a fact that a massive tactical police raid went down in Marana, Arizona, reportedly targeting his suspected hideout during February of 2026. Authorities have honestly kept incredibly tight-lipped regarding the nitty-gritty details of that entire tactical situation. To be completely fair, Evans remains a totally free man without a single formal accusation or arrest warrant, and no badge-wearing official has publicly stamped him as a primary target of the probe. Yet our brains inevitably circle right back to this one glaring thought. Suppose the main culprit desperately required backup to pull off a dual threat scheme. O'Toole actually laid that exact scenario out on the table, explicitly stating her professional belief that a dynamic duo might be pulling the strings behind the scenes. Even though experts traditionally focus squarely on the mastermind, you really have to wonder who that ringleader would tap for an assist, and it certainly wouldn't be some random guy off the street. You definitely avoid bringing in a total rookie who needs constant coaching or someone liable to crack the second the feds start breathing down their neck regarding a major abduction. A smart criminal would instinctively reach out to a deeply trusted confidant already dwelling securely within their innermost social bubble. They require a partner completely familiar with the victim's relatives, possessing an intimate grasp of the physical terrain and overall logistical layout. Trying to pin down exactly who perfectly matches that shadowy profile has stalled this entire detective operation for well over 30 days without yielding a single concrete answer. Therefore, we need to dive deep into the expert's analysis and truly listen to her findings, especially since O'Toole established the absolute foundational boundaries shaping this entire mystery. While chatting on camera with a local Virginia news crew at WAVY, she made it crystal clear that detectives must juggle two entirely separate theories at the exact same time. Investigators are constantly debating whether Nancy became a victim purely due to her famous daughter's television status or simply because she represented a highly vulnerable senior citizen residing solo. They might have zeroed in on her relying heavily on heart-regulating tech, struggling to move around, lacking defensive skills, and desperately needing daily pills just to stay alive. You are looking at vastly separate breeds of predators there, packing entirely distinct mentalities and driven by massively contrasting end goals. O'Toole insisted on keeping both avenues completely on the table simply because the physical clues haven't fully eliminated either potential narrative yet. However, the absolute kicker she dropped on us, the unavoidable truth no matter which theory you believe, is that every single angle demands one identical key ingredient. Both scenarios practically scream for highly confidential intel because some random drifter cruising the Catalina foothills wouldn't have a clue about the homeowner's severe cardiac issues. An outsider would have absolutely zero insight regarding the precise timing of her daily pharmaceutical needs. They certainly wouldn't possess an intimate mental map of the estate's floor plans or the exact blind spots of the security surveillance system. There is no way they could guess the dinner schedule on January 31st, let alone predict she'd be left completely unattended at precisely 9:48 that evening until the next sunrise. A random passing thug couldn't possibly possess those hidden details, but someone lingering closely within her personal sphere definitely would. Speaking straight to Newsweek, she explicitly stated that whoever walked up to her front porch possessed deeply private facts regarding both the residence and the lady living inside it. Those heavy statements weren't just tossed around by some amateur Reddit sleuth. They were delivered by a seasoned veteran who literally dedicated her life to dissecting federal murder scenes. O'Toole additionally highlighted a notorious habit among these types of predators, describing how they frequently stalk their prey beforehand by meticulously casing the joint. This dark preparation often involves creeping around the block several weeks in advance just to memorize the daily comings and goings of everyone inside the home. Federal agents urged neighbors living within a 2-mile bubble of the victim's residence to review their security feeds for an entire month leading up to February 1st, rather than just the previous day. Looking backward, 4 entire weeks provides an incredibly massive investigative time frame. Detectives clearly suspect that a stalker had been monitoring this residence for quite a while before the tragic evening unfolded. Whoever was keeping tabs on her must have had an initial spark of interest, along with a specific motivation to start spying. Applying this logic to the established facts leaves us wondering who actually held that level of intimate access to her daily routine. Who else understood their exact schedule, specifically recognizing that January 31st was reserved for a family dinner? The perpetrator knew Nancy would be brought back to her house between 9 and 10 at night, left completely isolated, and wouldn't be checked on until the sun came up. When narrowing down suspects with that inside knowledge, the final list becomes remarkably short. During a broadcast on ABC 10 News, expert profiler O'Toole shared her core philosophy, noting that unraveling the victim's life inherently exposes the perpetrator. Once you map out Nancy Guthrie's everyday habits, the list of individuals possessing the tactical insight needed to pull off this ambush practically vanishes. The front door security lens mysteriously lost its connection at exactly 1:47 in the morning. Someone manually disabled the device, proving this wasn't a dead battery or a Wi-Fi glitch before 41 agonizing minutes ticked by until 2:28. At that precise moment, her cardiac monitoring app lost its link to her cell phone, giving authorities a digital footprint suggesting she had been carried out of Bluetooth range. Far from being dead air, those 41 minutes provide the most crucial glimpse into the mind of the attacker. Listening to what the expert has to say about this particular window completely shifts your perspective on the entire investigation. While speaking with Steve Inskeep on National Public Radio, she emphasized that the footage and physical clues reveal a striking level of comfort. The attacker exhibited an eerie fluency, not merely with committing the violence, but specifically with navigating the actual floor plan itself. Spending 41 minutes creeping around a strange environment usually guarantees that you'll bump into walls, misjudge hallways, and wander into dead ends. Navigating a layout you already know by heart for 41 minutes paints an entirely different, incredibly calculated picture. The suspect navigated with chilling precision, perfectly aware of the medication cabinet, the master suite, the escape routes, and exactly which hallways to avoid. Strangers stumbling through pitch black corridors simply do not move with that kind of fluid confidence. Those footsteps undoubtedly belong to an intruder who was operating entirely off of muscle memory. O'Toole then raised a fascinating point about the meticulous preparation required to pull off an ambush of this magnitude. Predators who engage in thorough scouting missions will routinely stage elaborate dry runs to perfect their approach. They will visualize every single step of their assault in vivid detail long before taking action. Certain criminals will obsessively visualize navigating the target environment, running the scenario in their heads endlessly until every corner feels like home. She suggested the killer might have spent so much time fantasizing about the break-in that executing the plan on the night of February 1st felt like second nature. According to her analysis, his chilling demeanor suggested he had practically lived in that space already. Watching how effortlessly he utilized those 41 minutes shifts the focus away from discovering a motive and toward figuring out who possessed a blueprint. Pay close attention to his body language because he never rushes or speeds through his sinister tasks. He isn't nervously glancing around every 5 seconds, which is a massive red flag for typical trespassers whose instincts are begging them to flee the scene. Displaying total composure, he initially attempts to block the lens using one specific method. When that tactic fails, he smoothly shifts gears, grabs some foliage from the garden, and easily conceals the lens, a recovery O'Toole specifically highlighted to Newsweek magazine. She was fascinated by his seamless adjustment, noting how he maintained his cool and kept executing his objective without a hint of panic. Reacting that calmly under intense pressure serves as a massive psychological fingerprint. It paints a picture of a suspect who had already processed the sheer adrenaline of the crime long before stepping onto the property. Then the profiler dropped a devastating insight that perfectly cuts through all the surrounding speculation. She posed a blunt question to the radio host, wondering how a supposedly first-time offender would inherently understand the necessity of that specific wardrobe. Take a closer look at his tactical gear, because those are heavy-duty mechanics gloves, meticulously stitched right into the sleeves of his coat. Taping the cuffs meant zero bare skin was exposed, completely eliminating the risk of shedding stray biological material onto any surface he grazed. A mask completely obscured his identity, leaving absolutely nothing visible except for his eyes. He purposefully wore snug tops to guarantee that no loose threads would catch on door frames or leave microscopic evidence behind. Every layer of his disguise proves he intimately grasped exactly what crime scene technicians hunt for, as well as how to thwart their effort. The expert's inquiry regarding how a novice could instinctively possess that level of tactical foresight wasn't just for dramatic effect. This astute observation strongly implies that the culprit gained their forensic expertise through professional experience, rather than a quick internet search. The expert described this offense as an act of pure arrogance. Coming from someone with her background, this isn't just a casual judgment on his demeanor, it serves as a strict psychological classification. Within the specialized profiling field she has taught for decades, true arrogance means a calculated lack of natural panic, which normally kicks in when a sane person truly understands the immense danger of their actions. This happens when an individual completely accepts the reality of their upcoming actions. Sneaking inside an occupied residence with weapons at 2 in the morning to abduct an 84-year-old lady from her sleep shouldn't result in the calm demeanor displayed by the suspect on camera. A typical suspect would be visibly trembling and moving with frantic haste. Severe anxiety forces people into making terrible, split-second choices because overwhelming adrenaline strips away your composure, along with the precise physical control required to navigate a pitch-black residence for 41 minutes, as if you practically memorized the blueprint. Therefore, this arrogance goes way beyond simple self-assurance. We are looking at the mental aftermath of a perpetrator who had visualized this exact scenario repeatedly with such intense precision that the actual event lost its terrifying edge. Behavior like this simply does not align with a random intruder. O'Toole shared another chilling detail with CBS News that brings a whole new level of depth, far beyond what simple physical movements can reveal. The former profiler explained that criminals actually practice full-scale dry runs prior to executing their horrific acts, which is a surprisingly common reality in similar investigation. These suspects need absolute certainty that their gear fits perfectly, moves naturally, and rests exactly in the right spots on their person. Following that point, she noted the high probability of a viewer seeing the broadcast and suddenly realizing, I actually witnessed that guy practicing this exact setup. Spotting those specific garments isn't just a minor detail. It serves as a massive investigative lead, proving an eyewitness definitely noticed the suspect wearing that distinct gear prior to February 1st, rather than just passing by on a sidewalk, but in a specific setting that held significant meaning, indicating a moment where the disguised individual was actively practicing their upcoming abduction strategy. Furthermore, the investigator stressed that this particular witness probably hasn't connected the dots yet, waiting for the moment they view the surveillance clip and finally spot a familiar detail. For anyone currently tracking this mystery who hasn't hit the subscribe button, this is your sign to do so immediately. The following ensuing information is exactly where the expert's behavioral breakdown and the official timeline of events finally align into one clear path. Extortion messages surrounding this tragedy were never actually delivered to the victim's relatives. Instead, the perpetrator fired off emails to regional Tucson news outlets and TMZ demanding $6 million in cryptocurrency while including highly classified secrets regarding Nancy's property, ultimately proving to detectives that these terrifying letters originated directly from the individual who breached the residence. However, the kidnapper failed to provide any solid evidence that the victim was still breathing. Lacking concrete documentation showing Nancy survived captivity and could be exchanged safely means that bargaining is entirely impossible. When you completely sever the communication lines, successfully securing a payout becomes a pipe dream. Failing to gather those extorted funds completely eliminates any chance of walking away wealthy. Therefore, assuming cash was the ultimate objective, broadcasting threats directly to the media remains the absolute dumbest strategic move this criminal could possibly execute. O'Toole instantly recognized this pattern from her past experience, specifically drawing comparisons to the infamous Zodiac killer, a massive mystery she personally helped investigate. The connection she highlighted had absolutely nothing to do with the actual physical violence, focusing instead on the messaging tactics, since the Zodiac mailed journalists to gain a captive audience rather than seeking a paycheck from the press. His ultimate payoff was entirely psychological instead of monetary. The killer thrived on observing society freak out over his horrific acts, manipulating the headlines from the shadows and wielding a terrifying unseen dominance over the sheer chaos he unleashed upon the public. The profiler strongly believes the suspect behind Nancy's disappearance is completely obsessed with the news cycle, rather than just keeping a casual eye on the updates. People have offered incredibly conflicting opinions regarding the suspect captured on that residential security footage. The main debate centers around whether this guy is a calculated professional or a complete rookie. Evaluating only the visual evidence, his physical movements, and the specific order of his steps, how would you classify his skill level? To be completely honest, I refuse to place him on that specific scale, even though I listen to those exact descriptions constantly. You hit the nail on the head with that observation. However, my personal evaluation looks a bit different. We are watching a predator stroll onto a targeted victim's front step to commit an abduction, which ranks just below homicide as one of the most brutal offenses imaginable. Despite the severity of the act, my extensive background in interrogating suspects and analyzing crime scenes tells me this individual is acting incredibly relaxed. The man on the tape exhibits absolutely zero signs of typical anxiety. He went out of his way to conceal his identity and appears fully locked into pulling off this sick mission. He displays absolutely no hesitation, and if he happens to be second-guessing himself, he is hiding it perfectly behind a stone-cold exterior. I definitely spot a guy who might have tripped up and made a handful of sloppy errors along the way. You look at how he yanked up those bushes and smeared the security lens, though honestly, I cannot even swear that was an accident. We will never know the truth until somebody actually sits down in an interrogation room with him, yet it is glaringly obvious he mapped this entire thing out perfectly. At the end of the day, he actually pulled it off and remains completely obsessed with his handiwork, probably glued to the screen for every single breaking update. That absolutely includes keeping tabs on all the commentators and profilers who are currently trying to dissect his twisted mindset. Reaching out to a massive tabloid outlet was a wildly calculated move by someone who knew exactly what kind of spotlight he wanted to command. A person pulling those specific strings is definitely not your run-of-the-mill hostage taker sitting around waiting for a digital wallet deposit. This is the profile of a psychopath who committed the horrific deed purely for the dark thrill of doing it. When retired federal agent Jim Fitzgerald went on national television late last month, he bluntly stated that a $1.2 million bounty yielding zero solid leads told a very clear story. This operation was incredibly intimate and driven by a deeply private vendetta where cash was never part of the equation right from the drawing board. We are not talking about a botched extortion scheme where the bad guy suddenly got cold feet. It was never a shakedown ruined by a technical glitch, but rather a targeted strike completely divorced from any sort of payday. Pairing that reality with the chilling comparisons to historic serial cases shows us a predator who was never rushing against the clock. Instead, we are looking at a monster who never planned on turning this nightmare into a simple business exchange. Every single bottle of the elderly victim's crucial heart pills sat abandoned on the kitchen island when her frantic relatives showed up around lunchtime on February 1st. Those were the exact same daily prescriptions that her own child tearfully told the press were absolutely mandatory to keep her breathing, just sitting out in the open. They remained completely untouched in the exact spot they rested before a shadowy figure breached that doorway and snatched an 84-year-old grandmother into the dark. Let me break down exactly why that matters, because anyone running a true ransom gig knows their captive is their absolute best bargaining chip. That ultimate trump card instantly loses all of its value the second your prisoner stops breathing. A frail senior citizen relying on an implanted device and heavy-duty pharmacy pills faces a remarkably terrifying countdown clock without proper medical support. Literally anyone walking the streets today, even without a shred of nursing experience, can quickly figure that out. Common sense tells you that you simply cannot stash a chronically ill captive in a bunker for weeks without keeping her vital organs pumping. Snatching up those pill bottles is never about having a bleeding heart. It is about protecting your investment, since a corpse only buys you a massive homicide manhunt. That massive oversight was definitely not the result of a panicked crook making a hasty exit. The intruder chillingly lingered inside that residence for 41 minutes with absolute ice in his veins. He navigated the floor plan like he lived there, stared directly at a mountain of life-saving drugs meant for his target, and actively decided to leave them in the dust. When pressed about that agonizing 41-minute timeline, the lead behavioral expert did not mince her words. She pointed out that his terrifying level of comfort proved he already knew the layout of the property, which means he absolutely knew where the pharmacy bags were stashed. He had all the time in the world to stare at those crucial pills and make a choice, and his final call proves he was never actually planning to demand a massive payout. That grim choice highlights a predator who had fully sealed her awful fate long before he even turned the doorknob. He already knew exactly how the dark events of February 1st were destined to play out. Those crimson stains on the front steps, the smashed security lens, and his calculated prowling through the shadows all paint a horrifying picture of the ambush. Meanwhile, those abandoned pill bottles prove his deadly intentions were etched in stone before the attack even started. So go ahead and sound off with your home city down in the comments right now. Do not forget to smash that share button, because this psychological deep dive is about to point directly at familiar faces already floating around the police files. The veteran criminal profiler did not sugarcoat a single thing when delivering her chilling verdict. This culprit rests his head in a real neighborhood, meaning we are totally not dealing with some bizarre Unabomber situation here. We are not hunting a reclusive madman who vanished into the freezing Montana woods for decades just to hide his explosive hobbies from prying eyes. Your average guy lacks that intense level of privacy, since most of us juggle careers, nosy neighbors, busy relatives, and strict daily schedules that others constantly notice. Experts firmly believe the folks hanging around this suspect definitely caught him gearing up for something major, even if they never saw the actual blueprints of the operation. They absolutely sensed a drastic shift in his overall energy during those tense weeks leading up to February 1st. Friends and family were suddenly dealing with a completely different version of the man they thought they knew inside and out. He was sleepwalking through his usual routine, carrying a noticeably dark aura that simply did not exist prior to the attack. She stressed that this psychopath cannot just flip a switch and play the role of a loving family man, because that empathy was never there to begin with, and someone in his inner circle knows exactly how explosive his temper gets. They have definitely watched him fly off the handle and throw down over absolutely nothing. He gives off incredibly creepy vibes that his loved ones maybe could not fully articulate before, but this exact profile will immediately ring a bell for them. And then she dropped a bombshell that nobody in the media has really tackled yet. Folks close to this killer are also walking right into the line of fire. That kind of comment carries some heavy psychological weight, but it definitely doesn't mean the suspect is out there planning a random killing spree. What it actually means is that the folks who can currently put the puzzle pieces together are in serious trouble. People who held on to seemingly innocent details before February 1st might suddenly find themselves in the crosshairs of the exact same twisted mind that went after Nancy Guthrie. That is definitely not meant to make anyone feel better, because it is a straight-up threat. And it is a chilling warning aimed squarely at a very specific type of individual. We are talking about somebody tight enough with the killer to catch on to their plans, who is now close enough to the cops to become a major liability. So let's apply that logic to the facts we already have on the table about the early days of the band Black Tommaso, featuring Choney on bass and vocals. Then you've got Dominic Evans on the drums, sharing a deep bond since 2007 that they kept alive over years of making music together. Evans actually admitted to the New York Times that he hung out at Nancy Guthrie's place for an Easter egg hunt back in 2011, which was a full 15 years before she vanished, proving he has physically been inside the family's inner sanctum. So he has actually met the woman face to face. He knows all about the son-in-law's home life, his marriage to Annie, his whole setup down in Tucson, and exactly how that family went about their daily business. And just a week into the search, he found himself sitting in an interrogation room for 40 minutes, fielding pointed questions about his band and his buddy Sione. They also grilled him on his exact whereabouts from the night of January 31st straight through to the morning of February 1st, which was hardly just a casual porch chat. It was a full-blown 40-minute formal interrogation packed with some incredibly specific questions. When Sheriff Nanos officially cleared Guthrie's immediate relatives on February 16th, a journalist flat out asked if Evans was off the hook, and Nanos shot that down by saying nobody outside the core family was cleared. Evans hasn't officially been named a suspect, and he certainly hasn't been slapped in handcuffs either. Based on what he told the Times, detectives haven't even bothered to circle back with him since that initial sit-down. But there is still a massive question mark hovering over what he knew and saw in the weeks leading up to February 1st, especially when you apply O'Toole's psychological profile to a guy in his exact position. That particular mystery is nowhere near being solved. And let's not forget about the car still sitting in the Pima County impound lot as of late February, weeks after the family got the all clear. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer weighed in on this whole bizarre situation after pointing out that searching family properties with consent basically proved the cops had zero probable cause at the time. She floated a brand new theory that totally flips the script on that car. She brought up the wild idea that the cops didn't hold on to the vehicle to build a case against the owners at all. Instead, she thinks whoever was stalking Nancy in the weeks before February 1st might have used it as a tracking target to figure out her exact ride, her precise arrival time, and the exact moment she would be totally isolated. If the bad guy actually slapped a GPS tracker on that bumper, it changes everything. We are not talking about family members tracking each other, but rather the killer secretly tagging the family's personal vehicle. If that is true, then the car sitting in impound isn't a piece of evidence against them. It might just be our most direct physical link to the mastermind's thought process. O'Toole totally broke down the exact psychological makeup of this specific perpetrator. She described him as a cocky, driven individual who cares way too much about his public image while already being super familiar with both the victim and the layout of the house. And being surrounded by friends who noticed he started acting weird after February 1st definitely points the compass in one very specific direction. It sure doesn't point to some random creep who was just cruising through the Catalina foothills one night and decided to strike. It points a massive flashing arrow at somebody who already knew the layout of the land. This is someone with easy access and a grudge so deeply personal that the cash meant absolutely nothing to them. Plus, they definitely have at least one person in their inner circle who either helped them pull it off or is dangerously close to connecting the dots. When you map out the entire scope of this investigation, you really have to pay close attention to the specific search warrants and those repeated follow-up visits. The impounded car and that intense 40-minute banned interview have all been pointing down the exact same road since the very first week of February. O'Toole built her behavioral profile entirely on her own, just looking at crime scene actions and past cases. Yet, she ended up at the exact same conclusion. That is no accident. It is exactly what happens when the hard evidence actually matches up with the psychology. Just think back to what O'Toole warned us about the killer's behavior after the crime went down. She told detectives to keep an eye out for a guy who suddenly stopped showing up to work and became obsessively glued to the news cycle. We are talking about a guy dropping weird, casual remarks about the investigation that might just sound like harmless gossip to his buddies. But when you look at those comments through the lens of everything we just unpacked, they take on a totally terrifying new meaning. She flat out stated that the whole case relies on the person who recognizes the unique behavioral quirks in that security footage, or whoever spots something undeniably familiar in how that shadowy figure moves. Whether it is noticing the specific fit of those clothes, or just the exact way that suspect stood on the porch, that recognition is the ultimate smoking gun. They could be holding on to that crucial proof right now, completely torn on what to do, and constantly agonizing over the heavy price of speaking up versus the guilt of staying silent. O'Toole actually constructed this entire behavioral profile completely from the outside, working without a single shred of access to the investigation's highly classified findings. As for what the actual detectives working the inside of this case have uncovered, after 30+ days of intense forensic analysis and over 100 agents chasing down active leads, well, that is a complete mystery to us. Yet, when an expert behavioral profiler of her extraordinary caliber paints this detailed picture using absolutely nothing but public evidence, and it continuously points right back to the exact same geographical area that local law enforcement has been heavily canvassing since the very first week, the exact same residence, and the very same vehicle, the identical circle of acquaintances, all tied back to that very same individual. An overlap like that is definitely not just some random coincidence. That is a clear-cut path forward, and it absolutely demands to be chased down until the bitter end. O'Toole made it crystal clear that the perpetrator simply cannot stay hidden indefinitely. And honestly, that is far from from just being some blindly optimistic remark. That is a solid behavioral fact. The crushing psychological weight of carrying the dark secrets of February 1st, especially while every single person around you is desperately trying to piece together the events of February 1st, absolutely never lightens as the days go by. The psychological pressure simply continues to multiply. And that specific individual who spotted something slightly off in the weeks leading up to the horrific crime, the one who is currently just sitting quietly with their hidden knowledge and growing suspicions, happens to be the absolute most unpredictable and dangerous variable in this entire investigation. I do not mean dangerous to the actual perpetrator in a strictly physical sense, of course. I mean dangerous in that highly specific way. The brutal truth always becomes a massive threat whenever it finally bubbles up close enough to the surface. That one specific conversation, that singular phone call, or simply one brave decision to finally stop shielding a person who lost the right to be protected a long time ago has the absolute power to tear this whole facade right down to the ground. The current reward money sits at an astounding $1.2 million. That includes $1 million from Savannah Guthrie's grieving family, $100,000 from the FBI, and another $102,500 from the 88 Crime Organization. That is a staggering $1.2 million waiting for that one specific individual who is already holding on to the exact missing puzzle piece that breaks this wide open, not just some random tip that points in another vague direction. We are talking about the ultimate missing piece. The actual name of the monster, or the final confirmation of a dark reality they already secretly know or deeply suspect. O'Toole firmly believes that someone currently in the inner circle of this perpetrator very likely holds that golden key. Lead investigators have stated as recently as early March that this investigation remains extremely active and absolutely red hot. Do not be mistaken. The FBI has definitely not let this trail go cold. They have simply gone completely quiet for strategic reasons. And trust me, those are two wildly different things. Nancy is still out there waiting for justice. So if you happen to know anything, literally anything at all, you need to pick up the phone and dial 1-800-CALL-FBI or submit your tip online at tips.fbi.gov. You can also reach the direct reward line at 1-888-CRIME88. Please, just do the right thing and make that call. Also, if you have not already subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Make sure to share this video with everyone you know and drop your personal thoughts down in the comments below, because this case is definitely far from being over. Having worked the local news beat for years before heading to New York, I want to make absolutely sure the public grasps what is at stake here. We are talking about a missing mother, making this a matter of the highest urgency, which is exactly why so many of my law enforcement peers spoke up. They were deeply concerned with how the sheriff handled the investigation, particularly regarding his incredibly poor communication with the community. He released statements that were frankly appalling and completely inaccurate, while also taking actions that totally missed the mark. Consequently, several of us felt compelled to speak out, since we refused to let this tarnish the reputation of our community and the sheriff's department. I have worked alongside that extraordinary agency for 3 decades. So let me kick things off by asking you a broad question. What are your initial impressions of the entire Nancy Guthrie investigation, keeping in mind that we have now reached day 13? O'Toole warned that people in the killer's inner circle likely noticed a behavioral shift in the weeks before February 1st. A change in mood, unusual comments about the case, or withdrawing from routine are all warning signs to report immediately. If you recognize the clothing, the body language, or the movement pattern in that surveillance footage, your tip matters. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI, submit a tip at tips.fbi.gov, or reach the reward line at 1-888-CRIME88. A reward of $1.2 million is waiting for the one person already holding the missing piece of this puzzle. Reporting what you know is not betrayal. It is the single most powerful act of justice still available in this case. O'Toole made it clear the psychological weight of this secret does not fade. It only grows heavier with time. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves closure. And the truth is already out there, waiting for one brave voice. Nancy Guthrie vanished from her own home, and a world-class profiler says the answers lie closer than anyone admits. Surveillance footage captured someone calmly disabling her security camera at 1:47 inches the morning. For 41 minutes, an intruder moved through her home with no hesitation, as if he had memorized every hallway. Her heart medication sat untouched on the kitchen island, a deliberate choice that erased any pretense of ransom. FBI behavioral expert Mary Ellen O'Toole studied the footage and reached a conclusion that contradicted the sheriff's public narrative. O'Toole spent over a decade at the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, profiling the Unabomber, Zodiac Killer, and Green River Killer. She stated that the perpetrator possessed deeply private knowledge of the residents, the victim's health, and her daily schedule. His taped gloves, masked face, and fitted clothing showed an intimate understanding of forensic evidence collection techniques. That level of calculated preparation does not come from online research. It comes from experience, familiarity, and deliberate planning. Someone close to this perpetrator already knows something. That knowledge is the key to bringing Nancy home.